Now, yeah, I certainly would agree that a lot of that uh, kind of vintage era stuff is kind of being reissued and brought back out. But again, the design might be very close to being there, but there's still so much difference in some of those Les Pauls were just like one big slab of wood versus a bunch that are being glued together. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that adds some variety in tone and some difference in feel. But then they also then were like, people are complaining these are so heavy. And so they started chambering.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, talk about your take on some of those reissues. Are they as good as they were in the past, or is this just a kind of facsimile of this is as good as it's going to be based on what we can do now?
It's their custom shop like Fender and Gibson. Uh, the custom shop stuff is incredible stuff. I mean, they're taking their time, um, they're getting things right. Um, but it seems like you pick up an old guitar, there's just some mojo to it
Mm-hmm.
and they're capturing a lot of that stuff, and I felt them, um, but a lot of the historic models, the ones that I played in some of the Les Pauls, um, there's a certain feel that the old ones have. I don't know if that is they're getting closer, but it's still quite not right there.
Okay.
Um, and I'm sure there's some out there that I haven't played that are probably just right on the money.
Yeah.
And it's back then when the Les Paul, like the Cherry Sunburst Les Paul, in the late '50s and up in the '60s, they were just Les Pauls,
Mm-hmm.
just guitars. Good, they were made from good wood. They didn't, and good wood was easier to find at that
Yeah.
time because there wasn't as many guitars being made. For
Mm-hmm.
one thing. But now with the custom shop stuff, they're doing a lot of wood selection. I know a lot of these companies fly all over the world to pick out wood,
Mm-hmm.
but the guitar price reflects it,
Sure.
that type of thing.
Sure.
But I think as far as quality and build quality, um, I think they're being made just as good as the old ones.
Mm-hmm.
But the cost, like I say, reflects it. But there's still something about that aged wood that there's uh,
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of that brings me to the next question is that um, we are decades apart in age, but still guitar players. But the thing is, you have an experience from growing up and playing some of these when they were not so vintage. They were just maybe
mm-hmm,
considered used guitars at that point. Until people realized, hey, these are such amazing, you know, guitars to play, and then people started to keep them instead of sell them and
mm-hmm,
trade as people typically were doing. Um, and for my point of view, some of those vintage or even the custom shops, I mean, they're just so out of my price range to
mm-hmm,
be able to afford to get. And so then I am, left with the Squires, like an Epiphone, and with the 40th anniversary of the Squire that they just did last year, um, and Epiphone is doing something similar, but I haven't seen or played any of those yet. But I have played the Squire stuff. I think that the stuff that's coming out is amazing. It just and like you
oh
were
yeah,
speaking before about the CNC machines. I think in the last maybe 10 years, there's probably been an explosion of non major label brand guitars that are
mm-hmm,
made overseas. And so there's probably, if it was made in America, there'd be a legal issue with it, but overseas you don't really have
right.
the same kind of thing. But the things that are coming out, I think, are fantastically made.
Oh, a lot of them are great. I mean, bang for the buck, they're great.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not going to be like the true vintage stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
they price the price difference in them is buy a really good playing guitar, you can get, like you say, a really nice guitar for, under $1,000, and they play, and it's kind of hit and miss. I've seen some
Sure.
real dogs too, but you take, like I've got that. That's a 2010 Les Paul traditional. That's been purposely aged and stuff like that. But that guitar is a killer player, and that one was, I think it was right around the 2,000 range that I got.
Yeah.
And but when you take a nice historic, which is about $6,000 or $7,000, there's not that much difference between them.
Yeah. No, I would believe it. Yeah, I just think that. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, what do you feel is going to become of the vintage market long term, like in the next 15, 20 years? Do you think it is going to continue to grow, or as people age out and then decide, I don't need to have these instruments, and then just start selling them? Because there's a lot of people that are just collectors that are holding on to a ton of guitars that don't play, but then maybe as they pass or whatever, either those are inherited by other family members or they're just sold. But then I'm not sure. It's amazing to me to see how far up the values have gone, but I just don't know how sustainable that is long term.
Excuse me. I think it's going to keep, it'll stabilize for a while, but I think those instruments are always going to remain gems or heirlooms.
Yeah.
They're always going to, because they only made so many of them, and there's a ton more guitar players out there, and there's a ton more information out there on these old instruments, how collectible they are, that a lot of younger players going, hey, I can afford one of these. They'll find one, if they'll have a good job or something, and they learn through the internet how to appreciate these old instruments. So I think that's going to keep. I think they're going to stay where they're at, and granted, like you say, not everybody can afford those things, but there's always going to be rich people.
There always will be.
And they're gonna say, yeah.
It becomes a status symbol versus a tool to make music.
Well, exactly. A lot of these instruments are. What I like about Joe Bonamassa, he's got an incredible collection.
Yeah.
And seems to be like a great guy. And he could. I'm old enough to be his father.
Yeah.
But he's into these old instruments. But what I really like about him is he plays them.
Yes.
He takes them on stage and he plays them.
Yep. Absolutely.
He doesn't put them in a vault.
Yeah.
And they were meant to be played.
Absolutely.
And so I think they're just going to keep going. It's just it's like old cars. The only time I saw the vintage guitar market kind of crash was like that, not crash, but they came down. The first time I ever seen them come down in price was like the 2008 thing.
Yeah.
But they've been climbing back. They're back up there now.
Yeah.
At one time, I think it was before the 2008 50s, or like a Blackguard Telly, 53 Telly, you're looking at about 50 grand. And then they came down, they're back up there again.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is that, again, like we just said, Joe goes and takes those and plays them, and that's exactly what they're for. But, for like that Ibanez that I had, that is I think a 1990 Ibanez Gem floral pattern, the Steve Vai model. And I met him and I had him sign it.
Oh, cool.
Underneath, and it's a clear pick guard, so it's underneath the pick guard, so it's not ever gonna get rubbed off or whatever. But I also used it. I played that in shows and did all sorts of stuff with that over the years. So I mean, it has some dings here and there, but still, the era of that, the signature on there, the photo, authenticating all that, that is going to have several thousands of dollars of value.
Oh, definitely.
You know, and so, but also at the same time, knowing that and knowing where that value is, and it'll probably continue to grow over the decades, I also just don't want to play it out, you know? And so I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
I'd rather go and get something that is more affordable and that I can go bang up and not worry about that.
Well, you know, yeah, and like Joe Bonamassa plays his, but he in turn has flight cases for them. They're protected, that type of thing.
Heavily insured.
Heavily insured, you know, protected, that type of thing. Whereas, like you and I, if we go out and play, you know, we can turn our backs and, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I say that, I think that market is gonna keep going. You know?
Yeah. And I think that is great, but I also, you know, through when the pandemic started, right before that, the internet was ablaze with some of these import brands that you could get through Amazon. It was like 335 copy by this brand called Firefly. And then at that point, it was like $180 or something like that for that guitar. You know, and it's certainly not the best guitar at all, but people were fascinated by the price and like, hey, I can get this and make it look like I have a Gibson and from far away, and I can play it. But you know, again, based on the price point, you're going to have a lot of issues with pickups and, you know, workmanship or whatnot. But then there's these other companies that have also popped up. One brand in particular that I have also purchased through Amazon is this brand called Grote, you know, and they have been around since like '89, making guitars. And I find they have a 335 copy. They have, you know, a kind of a Les Paul. They have a semi-hollow Les Paul. And they have some of these like satin finishes that have come out in the last year or so, and their quality control I find to be really good. And at a certain level, you have to get, you know, they have kind of like a low end one that just is like shipped out as a guitar, and you have other ones that come with a gig bag and all that binding around the headstock. And I mean, boy, I've done so many shows with some of those guitars, and they sound fantastic. But then there's the also the group of people like, well, that's not a Gibson. Why don't you just go buy a Gibson? You're like, well, I can't afford to buy a Gibson, but I'm still wanting to go and play and you know, have a era and stylistically correct instrument to play. And you know, I'm like, well, this works for me. And you know, I'm not of the collecting type. I'm more of the utilitarian. Like, I want to use it, you know, I want to get.
Well, like I was out playing, and when I was playing in the country band Rocky Top for many years, I was using a mid '80s Squier Telecaster, Japanese, really nice guitar, and it said Squier by Fender on the headstock. And all the years that I owned that, not one person in the audience came up to me and said, how come you're playing a Squier?
Yeah.
Nobody knows.
Yeah.
Nobody knows the difference. They don't really care, you know.
Right.
And the people that care, your friends, say, why don't you buy a Gibson? They're not in the audience. They're one of your friends saying, yeah, why don't you buy that? You know. But there's the mystique of having, you know, the Gibson thing. And I used to have, you probably remember, I don't know if you remember it or not, I sold it back in '83, but it was a 1958 Cherry Sunburst Les Paul.
Yeah.
And it's actually in the Beauty of the Burst book.
Nice.
Right now, and it's notorious. Anyway, that was getting to the point where I wanted to play it one night. And this was back in the early '80s, and we were out playing out in Dickinson, and I took it out there. And it was during a break on stage. Here the other guitar players, coiled cord, grabbed onto one of the tuning gears, and it came down, and he caught it right before.
Oh my gosh.
And that was And you know, at that time, that was, you know, $3,500, $4,000 guitar,
Yeah.
$5,000 guitar.
In
And that was it.
82 or 83,
82.
and what that would mean in today's dollars,
Yeah.
huge money. It's
Oh,
a
yeah.
car.
I
That's
mean,
more
that
than a
guitar
car.
right now, it's nicknamed The Other Woman,
Yeah.
and there's video footage of it out there. Tom Whitrock, I think, still owns it, but I named that guitar,
Yeah.
and it's known as The Other Woman. But that guitar, if he were to sell it right now, it'd probably be about between $400,000 and $500,000 now.
Yeah.
But so I had that laying, you know, it's under my bed, and I'd take it out once in a while, and I ended up selling it because our band needed a PA system, which is the dumbest thing I ever did.
Mm.
And but who would have thunk?
Exactly. Wow.